Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to the Ambassador, the High Commissioner of Cyprus, and Ms. Katsaouni, who I've had the pleasure of working together in the last few weeks. Mayor of Nicosia, and of course Zaha and everybody else who is here. I would like to start by explaining in a way how we translated these methods, these ideas into what we think is a viable design. And we start doing that by looking at the site and the context. At some point, one has to look at what is the city that we are engaging with, and what is it that is really unique about it. And the two things that are, of course, interesting here is a Venetian wall, which was built in the 15th century, and it's a very unique piece of architecture. It's very large in scale, but also there is a kind of modernist constellation of housing that, let's say, circulates this old medieval town. The events of 1974 have meant that the historical center of Nicosia has been divided, and therefore a kind of relocation was de facto transformed the city into kind of two parts. So our concept was, in coming in engagement with this project, was how can we use all these elements to really find the things that are unique as a kind of Cypriot culture, but reinterpreted in a completely contemporary, modern, and forward-looking way. So this project, in many ways, you can see it as a pilot project for a sequential transformation of each one of the mode segments that are represented by the bastions that open up to each one of the cities of Cyprus, and by a kind of repetition from one to the other, an iteration and a gradual transformation, hopefully we can come to the point where we can see the city of Nicosia appearing again as a unified ring, as a city that has the facility of one circular central park, literally a central park that allows people to use it and to look at it from all sides and all points of view. So in doing that, we looked at the city, we looked at the kind of divisions, and we started thinking about what these things mean for us. And basically, the issue of division basically means a separation or an artificial distinction between elements that happens in many ways. So what we wanted to do is apply a set of rules, or let's say what I call operative points, whereby we try to reestablish fluidity and openness, accessibility and interconnectedness, inclusivity and variability. In other words, to make the elements of these place to tease out everything that it is unique about it. Of course, behind all these things, there is a notion and a faith that every single part in this planet has unique characteristics that are just waiting to be given form and expression. So while this methodology has a kind of very simple way of working, it applies itself in many different unique ways in many different parts. So coming from Nicosia into the particular, let's say, site, we're looking that the mode for one is obstructed by trees that are old, that are not being well taken care of, by car traffic, etc. The pedestrians do not circulate in the areas that are supposed to be used for park, and generally this area is being neglected because it's a dead end. It's a circulational dead end. So what we want to do is we want to make those accessibility points visually accessible from a pedestrian point of view, so that people see where they can go and they can actually go where they want to go. This happens by, and our concept, let's say, is to reunify all the different parts of the moat, the green areas that you see here that are currently separated by bridges, by streets, etc. And to also enhance the fluidity of the car traffic around, because this is how people move in cities today. They're very contemporary, dynamic cities, despite their kind of traditional or old-looking imagery, let's say. But in that sense, it's a very highly dense traffic network, and these things need to be released so that everybody can move in a kind of easy and calm way. So, in looking at this project a little bit more deeply, we started developing a series of structural concepts, i.e. implementations of structure and sculpting the elements that would eventually come to support this floating bridge, this dish that can hold all sorts of different events. And these investigations took us to the point where we started looking at the space of the bridge as a kind of vital space, as a new room, as a space where it becomes both a transient space but also a location in itself. At the moment, for those of you who haven't been on site, this area is completely blocked at the moment, and very recently we've also, through archaeological surveys, discovered a new part of the existing Venetian wall. Basically, these supports are now taking the form of a family of elements that are tripods, such as the ones that you see in this image here, bipod supports, and singular supports. So we're creating a family of supporting elements below that are, on one hand, are giving us the flexibility to move them around like a chess game. On the other hand, to always have a continuous structuring of the bridge. Yes? Interruption time.
No. Quick time.
Okay. The second thing is that we are looking into the landscape and how to continue and to create a pattern, essentially, that is continuous, variable, and changing from one side to the other. And this is perhaps one of the most interesting parts of the site, especially in looking at options such as this, which later became the kind of final solutions, where we're looking at shape blending. In other words, we start with a gradient on one side, and then by the time we come to the other end of this park, the shape essentially turns inside out. So we go from a kind of black to white, from a star shape to a vine leaf shape, if you like, or a kind of different shape. But what is important here is that one sits inside the other, and therefore the transition becomes extremely smooth, almost inconspicuous. And these are, let's say, three-dimensional manifestations of how this patterning can take place. And it basically also gives us the opportunity to structure the hard landscape versus the soft landscape on this field. Looking into plantation studies, looking at Fenerbahce series, mathematical ways to implement this. Then more localized plantation forms, more let's say, stratified forms. And then in the end, we come to a solution where we look at each one of these nucleuses here, and we try to articulate them in a different way every time, so that we try to implement in each one of these nucleuses a sense of uniqueness of both function and form and purpose and material. So moving through these, we're also looking into different ways to, obviously, we always show the park empty of any temporary events, but there is a myriad of ways how these can be, let's say, implemented, or these can be used by the municipality and the people. And this is one, perhaps, view of how this plantation can take form. The designs for each one of the nucleuses, using combination of different tree types, materials on the floor, whether it's grass, gravel, etc. Sculpted seating elements. Point is that in all of these things, we try to include as many different user types as possible. In other words, we don't want to make a park for a specific user group, but this is going to be a park that will be able to take 10, 15, 20 different types of users here. Some of the connections here, this is a view from Severus Avenue and looking onto the bastion and towards the bridge, which now appears open and porous beneath. Proposed vehicular circulation versus pedestrian accessibility now. There is additional ways of being able to reach the two levels of the park, and how we also, something that was actually quite important when we spoke to people there, was how do we create this kind of coexistence between the ancient monument and a contemporary piece of architecture, and how to bring these two things together. And of course, what is interesting here is that each one of these elements will read in its own right. None of their presence and the initial intent will ever be compromised. The wall will still read as a wall. The continuity of the curtain of the wall will be maintained and even further made visible by the excavations and the openness that we are instigating now. And at the same time, the square, which is a project of, let's say, zero volume, because it's only a surface, will now be only a place where people go to, but it doesn't have an actual physical mass or let's say volume, an elevation, a facade. So that is important, because that contrast between the two shows both the difference between, let's say, Venetian architecture of the mid-century and contemporary modern architecture, and at the same time the differentiation in material helps the two kind of stand out in their own right. Sections of the project looking at the existing bastion of the wall and how the bridge comes next to it. Kind of continuous sculpting of every element of this new object to make it all look monolithic and as simple looking as possible. And of course, the aim is to provide an infrastructure, let's say, a background for all the city activities and all the activities that have always been happening on Eleftheria Square to continue happening in the same way, and maybe in even a infrastructurally better facilitated way. The square at nighttime being lit by a series of distributed LED lights. The space under the bridge.
I mean, you should talk about the space under the bridge as a kind of a public room.
Yes, I think it's important because, of course, the climate necessitates some sort of coolness in the way that people use the space. So by opening up the moat again and connecting one side to the other, it gives us the opportunity to have an area, a rather large area, about 1,500 square meters or so, of space that is actually covered. It's an outdoor covered space. It's an implied room, if you like, and in there people can have, let's say, lunch breaks, or they can use it to sit. It can also be a space where information about the city of Nicosia, the events of Nicosia, can be advertised there in a variety of ways. And the space over. So this kind of maximization, if you like, of access between the bottom part of the park, the moat, and the top part of the park means that there is one interconnected, continuous surface that makes movement upstairs and downstairs extremely easy. These are our latest views of the whole complex, and some additional night views. And at night, perhaps this can be a space in the summer or in full moon nights where people can actually use it in all sorts of ways for different events. like night projections, like something that the mayor instigated, which was night walks through the city and so on. So maybe this becomes one more stop, let's say, in this kind of walk through the city. At the same time, this becomes a kind of contemporary landmark for Nicosia. And that's all. I'll keep discipline tonight so we can finish early. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.